At 2:17 a.m., a surveillance camera caught something Harvard never expected. A janitor, alone, chalk in hand, solving an equation the head of mathematics had been working on for months. He wasn't enrolled. He wasn't supposed to know. By sunrise, the footage had leaked. And by noon, Harvard's silence was louder than any applause.
But what they did next
Changed everything. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Rain tapped gently against the centuries-old glass of Widener Library. At 11:47 p.m., most of Harvard's elite had long since retired to dorms, offices, or lounges. But in the lower halls, beneath the polished mahogany staircases and oil portraits of legacy scholars, a man pushed a rattling gray cart stacked with cleaning supplies. His name was Elijah Reed, and no one ever asked it. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering like the slow tick of a clock that didn't quite want to move forward. Elijah, in his late 40s, wore a faded navy jumpsuit with a frayed patch that read "Facilities." His hands were calloused, palms leathery from years of bleach, brushes, and forgotten wages. The broom glided with a steady rhythm, a rhythm learned not from training, but from endurance. In this place of towering intellects and billion-dollar endowments, Elijah was invisible. He had worked these halls for 8 years, and in those 8 years he'd cleaned up after some of the brightest minds in America. Empty Red Bull cans from all-nighters, torn flashcards, broken pencils, and half-written proofs left on chalkboards by undergrads who'd go on to be consultants, coders, and CEOs. But no one ever wondered what Elijah thought of those equations. No one knew that he read them. Each night, while the campus slept, Elijah studied. In storage closets, in broom-lined corners, in classrooms with unlocked doors. His textbooks were salvaged from dumpsters, discarded editions, outdated syllabi, marked up margins. He had filled 4 spiral notebooks with self-taught calculus. No one asked how a janitor could understand multivariable functions. No one asked, because no one saw him. The discrimination was never loud. That's what made it lethal. It came in the way students stepped around him, as if he were part of the architecture. It came in the faculty's clipped nods, the security guards' extra glances, and the assumption, always the assumption, that he didn't belong anywhere but behind a mop. 3 weeks ago, Elijah overheard 2 sophomore boys laughing in the hallway. One had accidentally left his laptop in the lecture hall. "Don't worry," the other smirked. "What's the janitor gonna do? Solve my homework?" They both laughed. Elijah smiled to himself, not out of amusement, but out of something deeper. A quiet, burning ache. Because he could have. He could solve their homework, finish their problem sets, and even correct their mistakes. And he had. Silently. Alone. On his own sheets of paper. In break rooms where the heater rattled like an old man's cough. But he said nothing. 'Cause janitors don't speak calculus. At least not in Harvard's eyes. In the science wing, Dr. Nathaniel Carr's name echoed like gospel. Tenured before 40, head of the Applied Mathematics Department, published in journals with names only 5 people in the world read. He was brilliant but icy. Students respected him, feared him, and never challenged him. Carr had passed Elijah in the halls many times, never a hello, sometimes a glance. Once, when Elijah had forgotten to remove his gloves before stepping into the professor's office to clean, Carr scolded him for leaving smudges on the glass desk. "Do it again," he had said coldly. Properly, this time. Elijah never forgot the tone. Cold, clipped, commanding. Not angry, just indifferent. To Carr, Elijah was not a person. He was a function. A cleaner. A service that arrived without voice, without history, without intellect. That night, as Elijah scrubbed the baseboards outside Carr's office, he noticed the door slightly ajar. Inside, on the professor's whiteboard, a new equation had been half-written. A mess of derivatives and notation, so complex it looked like art. Elijah paused, not because he was curious, but because he recognized it. It was a variation of the Laplace transform, something Carr was rumored to be researching for his upcoming paper on neural mapping algorithms. Elijah stared for several minutes, not frozen, not afraid, focused. He whispered under his breath, redrawing the equation in his mind, checking the notation. There was an error. A small one. A sign flipped in the 3rd step. Anyone else would have missed it. But not Elijah. He stepped back. His hands itched for a marker. He didn't move. Because janitors don't correct professors. That night, as he walked back to the janitor's closet tucked behind the psychology wing, he passed two graduate students debating over a proof. Their tones were sharp, excited, competitive. "You're misapplying the theorem," one insisted. "No, you're just not seeing the function as multidimensional," the other snapped. They didn't notice Elijah. He wanted to tell them both they were wrong, but he said nothing. He returned to the closet, sat on an overturned crate, opened his spiral notebook, and began to rewrite the equation from Carr's board. This time, he finished it, with corrections. Down the hall, someone laughed. A party, a campus teeming with future inventors, doctors, senators, and yet the man who had just solved what a professor couldn't, sat alone in a room that reeked of Lysol and silence. Harvard had never seen him. But that was about to change. Because Elijah was about to do something no janitor at Harvard had ever done. And someone was going to catch him doing it. One surveillance camera, installed quietly last month for security upgrades, just captured Elijah writing a solution on a chalkboard he was never supposed to touch. And someone just started watching the playback. Before the uniform there was a dream, one buried by discrimination, and a single bad break. The next morning, a cool wind rolled through Harvard Yard, rustling the leaves into gentle spirals across the brick walkways. Students shuffled between classes, half asleep, headphones in, clutching coffee. Inside Jefferson Hall, whispers had begun. "Did you see that footage?" "Nah. What happened?" "Dude, they caught the janitor solving one of Dr. Carr's equations." "No way. What, like, copying it?" "No. Solving." He corrected it. The whisper moved like static, not loud enough to be called a rumor, but persistent enough to stain the air. By mid-morning, 5 students in the applied mathematics program had seen the video. It had been quietly pulled from the camera logs by a curious teaching assistant named Marla Jensen, who worked under Dr. Carr and had a habit of reviewing night footage to monitor lab equipment access. What she found at 2:17 a.m. made her pause the footage, rewind, and call her roommate into the room. Marla didn't recognize the man at first. Just a blurry figure, tall, dark-skinned, moving with careful precision, as he wrote something on the chalkboard in lecture room 12. But when he stepped aside and the solution came into full view, she leaned closer, and her breath caught. That equation wasn't just complex. It was the unsolved backbone of Carr's newest research. He had been building it for weeks, piece by piece, and even hinted in seminars that it might take months to stabilize. And this man, this janitor, had not only written out the full solution, he had corrected Carr's mistake, silently, at 2 in the morning, wearing a mop belt. Marla didn't share the footage with Carr. Not yet. Something about it unnerved her. Because whoever that man was, he hadn't been guessing. He had known. Elijah was unaware of the growing curiosity, just one floor above where he now polished the linoleum. He kept his head down, focused on the floors, but his mind was miles away. Last night had been different. Dangerous. A line crossed. He knew the risk of writing on the board. New cameras might be watching. But the thrill of solving something real, Harvard level, had pulled him beyond caution. Still, his face gave nothing away. He'd learned how to wear stillness like armor. What no one at Harvard knew, not Carr, not Marla, not the students quoting the footage secondhand, was that Elijah Reed had once walked a very different path. 15 years earlier, he had a name printed on a scholarship letter. Elijah Christopher Reed, full ride to Georgia Tech. His high school transcript had been spotless. Valedictorian. AP everything. Math Olympiad finalist. SAT score in the 1500s. But more than that, he had passion, raw, unmistakable fire for math. His teacher, Miss Whitaker, once told a reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, that boy could reverse engineer Einstein's notebook with just chalk and time. He wasn't supposed to end up pushing a mop. He was supposed to be solving for quantum elasticity in data frameworks, or designing predictive algorithms for aerospace. And for a few months he would. But the American dream isn't built evenly. Some people walk a golden path to opportunity. Others are handed a cracked map and told not to complain. At Georgia Tech, Elijah faced a wall he never expected. It didn't come in lectures. He aced those. It came in closed doors. Professors who said, "You don't look like someone from this department." TAs who double-checked his ID. Security who once asked him for proof he was a student, while letting his white roommate walk past without a glance. It wore him down. And then came the incident. His junior year, a laptop went missing from the department's computer lab. Elijah had been there, studying late. He'd signed in, signed out, followed all protocols, but he was the only black student on that floor that night. He was the only one questioned. No charges were filed. No proof was found. But the damage was done. Word spread fast. He stopped getting calls for research assistantships. One professor rescinded a letter of recommendation until the matter is cleared up. It never cleared up. It just hovered. When his scholarship renewal was delayed due to a paperwork issue, Elijah missed the tuition deadline by 2 days. Financial aid declined his appeal. He was forced to withdraw from a full-ride scholar to unemployed because of a whisper, a stereotype, and a system designed to second-guess black excellence. He took a job fixing HVAC units, then floor waxing. Eventually, a cousin got him a cleaning gig through a subcontractor that worked with Boston campuses. Harvard was just one stop on the route. One stop that turned into 8 years. The uniform replaced his name. The label replaced his record. Until last night, in Jefferson Hall, Marla was now quietly researching Elijah. It took some digging, but she found a mention in an old science fair article, archived online. Elijah Reed, Decatur High State math champion. She blinked at the headline. Her gut twisted. Something about this didn't sit right.
Why was a former math champion cleaning hallways?
And why had no one asked that before? That afternoon, Marla printed a still frame from the surveillance footage. Elijah at the board, chalk in hand, mid-equation. She placed it in an unmarked envelope and slid it into Dr. Carr's office inbox. Kerr found it 3 hours later. At first, he assumed it was one of his grad students. A prank, an attempt at clever mimicry. But as he studied the board, his expression darkened. It was correct. More than that, it was elegant, clean, confident, with a rhythm that only came from mastery. His eyes narrowed. Who had touched his board? Who had seen his private work? He replayed the footage, watched the figure slowly approach the board, watched the pause, the correction. Kara's breath hitched when he saw the man's face. It was the janitor. That same man who had once left streaks on his glass desk, who never spoke, never looked him in the eye. That man had just rewritten the heart of Carr's own research. Correctly. For a full minute, Carr didn't move. And then his pride, sharp, bitter, old, took over. Because what stung wasn't that a janitor had solved the problem. It was that he had missed it. Dr. Carr deletes the footage and calls a private meeting with the dean, claiming someone may have breached academic security. But he doesn't name Elijah. Not yet. Instead, he sets a trap. He wants to catch him again, but this time in person. To Dr. Nathaniel Carr, intellect had a skin tone, and his was the only one that counted. Dr. Nathaniel Carr sat rigid in his leather chair, the printout still in his hand. The image stared back at him. Elijah Reed mid-step, mid-thought, mid-genius, his body half turned from the board, chalk still raised like a conductor's baton. Tara couldn't stop staring at the chalkboard behind him. That solution, his solution, had been corrected by someone who was never supposed to understand it. A man who pushed a mop down the very hallway where Carr had built his academic empire. It wasn't the correction that angered him. It was the clarity. The precision with which Elijah had written. That kind of poise didn't come from chance. It didn't come from theft. It came from years of disciplined learning. The kind Carr believed came only through proper channels. Scholarships, mentorships, published work, tenure. It wasn't something he believed belonged to people like Elijah Reed. Not because of Elijah's job, but because of something Carr never said aloud, even to himself. His trust in intellect was skin deep. Kerr would have denied it if asked. He would have pointed to former students, to the one black PhD candidate he'd reluctantly supported. But that wasn't proof of fairness. That was tokenism, masked as tolerance. In his world, black brilliance had to look a certain way, well-spoken, well-connected, and always eager to prove it belonged. Elijah Reed didn't fit that. He wasn't on any rosters. He had no credentials, no degrees, no visible path, just a broom in one hand, and a chalk in the other. That defiance, that intrusion, threatened everything Carr believed about how knowledge should be earned. And more dangerously, who was allowed to hold it. In the quiet of his office, Carr didn't rage. He didn't scream. He simply plotted. He forwarded the still image to the Dean of Academic Integrity without context, labeling it possible breach of restricted materials, requesting internal review, Sensitive. Quiet handling advised. He signed it, then stood. Tonight he'd stay late. He left his office door cracked. Just enough. He'd restage the board, write a new, even more complex equation. One, unsolved. One designed to bait a mind, like Elijah's. Then he'd wait. Because if Elijah returned to finish it again, this time there'd be no ambiguity. This time Carr would catch him in person. Meanwhile, in the staff corridor beneath the lecture halls, Elijah opened his locker, his hands slower than usual. Something had changed in the air. He could feel it. For 8 years, Harvard had ignored him. But now it felt like someone was watching. Glances lingered longer. A few students looked twice. Even the security officer near Jefferson Hall paused before waving him through. Something he'd never done before. Elijah didn't panic. He observed. He had learned long ago that fear got black men labeled. But calm, that was its own camouflage. Still, the feeling that something was wrong gnawed at him. So he skipped his usual routine. No late-night chalkboards. No detours past Carr's hallway. He cleaned in silence and moved on. But the next night, the board was different. He noticed it while buffing the hallway floors. Room 3A. Carr's private teaching room. The board was uncovered, freshly written. A sprawling integral that curved like a maze. Deliberately messy, but not unintentional, to Elijah's eyes. It was bait. He stared at it through the small glass window in the door. It was interesting, challenging, wrong. He stood for nearly 10 minutes. Heart steady, gaze locked. He whispered calculations to himself, lips barely moving. He didn't touch the door, didn't move closer, just looked. And then, as if sensing the eyes behind the bait, he stepped back and walked away. Carr, seated quietly in the corner of the dark room, behind a divider near the back window, saw it all. He had left the lights half-dimmed, just enough to silhouette the board, but keep himself hidden. He waited for Elijah to enter, chalk in hand, to prove it, but Elijah didn't fall for it. Carr waited nearly an hour, motionless, and then a thought crept in, one far more unsettling than any proof or solution. What if Elijah knew it was a trap? 2 days passed. Carr grew impatient. The whispers hadn't stopped. Someone had leaked the image. It had made its way into group chats. Students weren't mocking it. They were questioning it. Have you seen it? Dude might be smarter than half the department. Is he like a genius or something? The janitor was becoming visible. Carr couldn't tolerate that. So he escalated. He submitted a formal request to Human Resources, a review of all maintenance staff access to academic buildings after hours. He framed it as security protocol. He never mentioned Elijah by name. But that didn't matter. The targeting had begun. Elijah was called into a meeting the next morning, with his shift supervisor and an unfamiliar admin officer. We're just reviewing standard access logs, the admin said flatly. Just confirming everyone's in compliance. Elijah nodded, expression unreadable. You've been observed in room 3A. Late evening hours. That's a restricted research space. I clean the rooms on rotation. Elijah replied calmly. Yes. Of course, the officer said, but didn't write anything. Elijah left the meeting knowing exactly what it was. A warning. Not loud, but lethal. That evening Marla, still watching from the sidelines, made a decision. She had printed out a copy of Elijah's high school math award article and left it tucked inside a notebook in the grad student lounge. On purpose, she wanted someone else to find it. To start asking, but she didn't expect the person who found it to be Carr's own teaching assistant, Drew Langston. Drew read the article, then reread it, then searched Elijah's name online. And something clicked. Drew had seen the surveillance footage before Carr deleted it. He had seen the solution. And now he was beginning to believe that this wasn't just a fluke. This janitor wasn't trespassing. He was surpassing. Drew didn't say anything to Carr. He printed the article again, and he sent it anonymously to the student newspaper editor. That night Elijah returned to his closet, closed the door, sat on the crate, but this time he didn't open his notebook. He opened a manila envelope. Inside were folded sheets, old copies of his Georgia Tech transcript, scholarship letters, and one worn photograph of him shaking hands with a state senator at a high school math event. He stared at it for a long time. Then slowly, deliberately, he stood. He didn't take his notebook this time. He took a fresh piece of chalk from his cleaning cart and walked toward lecture room 3A. As Elijah steps into room 3A and begins writing, this time knowing exactly what he's walking into. Someone else is already recording him through the small glass window. But it's not Carr. It's Drew. And he just hit send on a video file titled Harvard's Hidden Genius, the janitor who outsmarted a professor. When the janitor's mop paused mid-swipe, a quiet genius began scribbling in the shadows. The hum of the vacuum echoed down the marble corridor. Midnight again. Elijah moved methodically, his hands performing their nightly routine with quiet precision. But tonight there was something different in his walk, an undercurrent of tension hidden beneath the stillness. Every sound, every flicker of light felt sharper, like the campus itself was holding its breath. He reached lecture room 3A. The door was slightly open. Inside, the whiteboard gleamed under the dim overhead light. The equation Dr. Carr had written still sprawled across it, a twisting, complicated structure that dared to be understood. Elijah stepped inside. The smell of chalk dust, mixed with the faint trace of lemon cleaner. He ran his finger lightly along the edge of the desk, leaving a clean line through a layer of dust. His eyes moved across the equation, scanning each symbol as if reading music. And then, as naturally as breathing, he picked up a piece of chalk. He started small. A correction to the first integral, a redefined boundary, then a subtle rederivation that altered the curve of the entire system. His movements were steady, unhurried, graceful. Every mark he made carried years of buried talent and muscle memory that no one had ever seen. His mop leaned against the wall like a witness. He wasn't showing off. He was thinking out loud, his mind unraveling the puzzle in silence. Each line he drew connected something invisible. His past to his present, humiliation to redemption. The chalk squeaked once, sharply, echoing louder than he expected. Elijah paused, looked up. The corridor beyond the window was empty. Still, silent, but there was a sense instinctive, primal, that someone was watching. He shook it off. For years, he had been ignored, overlooked, invisible. No one was suddenly interested now. He went back to work. Outside the door, Drew Langston held his phone at chest level, the small red recording light glowing faintly. His heart raced. Every stroke Elijah made on that board felt like watching a secret unfold. Drew didn't know why he felt compelled to record it. It wasn't exploitation. It was reverent awe. He had spent his entire academic life surrounded by people who flaunted their intellect. But this man, this janitor, worked in silence. There was no audience, no applause, no pretense, just brilliance, raw and unpolished, shining through the grime of circumstance. Drew whispered to himself, "He's really doing it." Then he heard footsteps behind him. He quickly slipped the phone into his pocket and turned. Marla Jensen stood a few feet away, her face tense, her voice a whisper. "You shouldn't be here." "You saw the footage too," Drew said. "You know what this is." She glanced through the glass. "Care's going to find out. You know how he is. Maybe he should." Marla's eyes flicked toward the board again. Elijah was lost in motion now, writing faster, building momentum, as though the board itself was a living thing, urging him forward. "You can't expose him like this," she said quietly. "He's just trying to survive here." Drew shook his head. "No, this needs to be seen." And with that, he stepped back into the shadows and hit send on the email. The video began uploading to the Harvard Tribune's editorial inbox. Inside the classroom, Elijah paused mid-equation. He felt something, an invisible pulse of attention that he couldn't explain. He turned slightly toward the window, sensing movement. For a moment, he thought he saw a reflection, a glimmer of light that shouldn't have been there. But then it vanished. He took a slow breath, trying to calm the unease in his chest. The silence pressed down like a weight. He finished the line he was writing, then leaned back, chalk dust settling on his hands. His mind drifted back to Georgia Tech, nights like this where he'd stayed up past curfew solving problems no one had assigned him. He remembered his professor's words, sharp and dismissive, when he tried to present an original theorem. "Ambitious, Mr. Reed," the man had said. "But mathematics requires discipline, not imagination. Perhaps focus on what's been proven before you try to prove something new." He had never forgotten the sting of those words, the tone that implied, "You don't belong here." And now, years later, he was proving something anyway, not to the professor, not to Carr, but to himself. He stepped back, looking at the full whiteboard. The once messy equation was now elegant, whole, a dance of symbols and symmetry. He could see the pattern in it, the way data could breathe, the way numbers could map the very thought process of the human brain. He smiled faintly. Then the door clicked. Elijah froze. Dr. Nathaniel Carr stepped inside. The two men stood facing each other across the room, one in a tailored gray suit, the other in a janitor's uniform. Two worlds colliding in silence. Carr's voice was calm, too calm. I was wondering when you'd come back. Elijah didn't answer. Carr stepped closer, eyes flicking to the board. I should be angry, he said. But mostly I'm curious. Where did you learn that? Elijah hesitated. Books. Practice. Carr's brow lifted. Practice, he repeated, almost mockingly. You're telling me you've mastered higher dimensional calculus from, what, a broom closet? Elijah's gaze didn't waver. You'd be surprised what people can learn when no one gives them the chance. The words landed heavy. Carr's expression hardened, but there was something beneath it, something flickering between fascination and resentment. You had no authorization to be in this room, Carr said. No right to touch my work. Then maybe you should have gotten it right the first time, Elijah replied quietly. The silence that followed was electric. Carr's jaw tightened. For a man used to controlling rooms, the loss of power was palpable. He moved closer, his voice low. Do you understand the implications of what you've done? You've breached security protocols. You've accessed private research. If I report this, you lose your job, possibly your freedom. Elijah didn't flinch. If you report it, you'll have to explain how I solved it. Carr's eyes narrowed. Elijah continued, calm, deliberate. And when you do, they'll ask why a janitor knew what you didn't. Carr's breath hitched, a moment of pure fragile ego breaking through the composure. He turned away, his mind racing. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what to say. Elijah set the chalk down, wiped his hands and turned to leave. Don't worry, Professor, he said softly. I'll clean up after myself. And then he walked out, leaving Carr alone in a room filled with proof that intellect had no uniform. The next morning, campus was buzzing. The video Drew had sent had gone live. The title read, Harvard Janitor Solves Professor's Equation, Alone at 2 a.m. Within hours, it spread across group chats, social media, and eventually, national feeds. Some dismissed it as fake, others demanded the truth. Comment sections exploded with debates about race, opportunity, and unseen talent. Harvard's PR department scrambled for control, but the footage was everywhere. Carr saw it on his phone at breakfast. The sound of his spoon clinking against his coffee mug echoed in the empty faculty lounge. His own name wasn't mentioned in the video, but everyone knew. His colleagues' eyes told him everything. Pity from some, quiet judgment from others, and from a few bare, unfiltered satisfaction. That afternoon, the dean's office called him in for a meeting. Elijah, meanwhile, was scrubbing the marble staircases outside the same building, earbuds in, head down. He didn't need to check the internet to know what had happened. He could feel it, the strange shift in how people looked at him, some with awe, some with discomfort, some with resentment. His phone vibrated in his pocket. It was an email from an unknown sender. Subject: They know. Message: Stay away from campus tonight. It's not over. He stopped wiping, the rag falling loosely from his hand. Somewhere, in an office above, Dr. Carr was being questioned about the janitor, and in that moment, for the first time, Elijah realized this wasn't admiration. It was exposure. And exposure at Harvard had never been safe. As Elijah left campus early that night, a security guard intercepted him with a clipboard. Mr. Reed, the guard said, avoiding eye contact. Administration wants to see you first thing tomorrow morning. Bring your ID and your access badge. The guard hesitated before adding quietly, I'd just be careful tonight. Elijah nodded slowly, not asking why, because deep down he already knew. The professor saw the proof. His ego saw a threat. The video didn't just go viral, it erupted. By morning, the clip had been reposted by science blogs, educational TikTok pages, and even celebrities who praised the mysterious Harvard janitor for his quiet brilliance. Strangers began referring to him by name. Elijah Reed. His image, blurred from surveillance, was now digitally enhanced, sharpened, analyzed. But while the public watched in awe, Dr. Nathaniel Carr seethed. Carr had built his identity on being the smartest man in the room. Every room. Now someone with no credentials, no degrees, and no platform had rewritten the equation he was basing a major paper and an entire research grant on. And worse, he did it better. At 9:17 a.m., Carr was summoned to the dean's office. The meeting was formal on the surface but ice-cold beneath. The dean, Dr. Geraldine Marks, sat stiffly behind her desk, her glasses halfway down her nose. "Dr. Carr," she began, "we need to discuss a matter that's become unusually public." She turned her laptop toward him. There, paused mid-frame, was Elijah, writing. Focused, confident. Carr's jaw tensed. "You're aware of this incident?" Carr nodded slowly. "It happened in my lecture hall." Dr. Marks steepled her fingers. "Why didn't you report the footage immediately?" "I handled it internally." "With whom?" "No one." He lied. "It didn't seem significant." Dr. Marks leaned forward. "A man with no academic standing corrected a theoretical model you've been developing for months, on tape, and that didn't seem significant." Carr's silence stretched. Marks closed the laptop gently. "There's pressure coming from outside. Journalists, alumni, potential donors asking how a janitor became the most discussed mathematician on our campus overnight." He bristled. "He's not a mathematician." "Is that what bothers you?" she asked, voice sharper now. "That he's not one of you?" He didn't respond. But that was answer enough. Meanwhile, Elijah sat in the staff break room, a paper coffee cup growing cold in his hands. Across from him, Marla and Drew exchanged glances. "You're trending on 3 platforms," Drew said. "Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit's education forum." Elijah stared blankly. "Someone even found your old scholarship profile," Marla added. "You were a math prodigy." He shrugged, not out of modesty but fatigue. "That was a long time ago." Drew leaned forward. "Why didn't you finish school?" Elijah's lips pressed into a thin line. "Ask the system." Neither of them pushed further. Outside, students were gathering. Some wanted a glimpse. Others wanted a photo. But Elijah wasn't flattered. He wasn't flattered when they called him a real-life Will Hunting, or when strangers on YouTube made reaction videos analyzing his chalk strokes. It didn't feel like praise. It felt like a spectacle. He'd been ignored for years. Now he was being watched. And in between those two realities lay a dangerous gap. That night at exactly 2:03 a.m., Elijah returned to lecture room 3A. He hadn't planned to. Something inside pulled him there, like a tether that refused to let go. He didn't come to write. He came to clean, to finish what he'd started. The board still bore his equation. Carr hadn't erased it. For a long moment, Elijah stared at the math, not with pride, but with a strange sadness. It was never about proving himself. Not really. He just wanted to keep learning in a place that never wanted him to begin with. As he wiped the edges of the board, the door opened again. Dr. Carr. His steps were slow, deliberate. He looked more tired than usual, less powerful. "Why did you come back?" Carr asked. "To clean," Elijah said simply. "You could have walked away after that video went viral." "I could have," Elijah said. "But this is still my job. Whether you respect me or not." Carr said nothing. He stepped toward the board, eyes scanning Elijah's writing one more time. "You made the functions smoother, more efficient. That substitution on the 3rd line, it's cleaner than mine." It was as close to an admission as Carr would ever give. Elijah didn't smile. "I wasn't trying to outperform you. But you did." A beat of silence. "You're not supposed to exist," Carr said suddenly, voice quiet. Elijah turned to face him fully now. "What does that mean?" Carr's gaze dropped to the floor. "This place, these institutions, they weren't built for people like you. You weren't supposed to make it this far. And yet here you are, in my classroom, correcting my work." Elijah's voice was steady. "Maybe that's the real problem." Carr didn't respond. Because deep down, he agreed. Not consciously, not loudly, but somewhere buried in the cracks of his ego. Carr resented that Elijah, without title or tenure, had reminded him what true genius looked like. Not polished, not packaged, just real. At that same moment, across campus a storm was quietly brewing. Drew had received a message from someone anonymous. A screenshot. It showed an email exchange between Carr and Harvard's facilities office. Dated before the footage leaked. Subject staff surveillance. Message. "If you see the janitor in any unauthorized lecture rooms after hours, flag him. Immediately." It was dated a full day before the video went viral. Carr had tried to preempt it, had already started building the case before Elijah was caught. Drew's stomach twisted. This wasn't just about math. It was about power. About burying a black man's brilliance before it could make someone uncomfortable. Back in room 3A, Elijah packed up his supplies. You said I wasn't supposed to exist, he repeated quietly, before leaving. But maybe that's the problem with this place. You keep trying to erase people who don't fit your picture. But some of us, we don't disappear that easy. He left Carr standing alone again. Same whiteboard, same silence. But this time Carr couldn't pretend it didn't happen. Because this time, the world had seen it. As Elijah walks into the hallway, a campus security officer approaches him, not with a warning, but with a sealed letter from the dean's office. It reads, "Your employment status is under review. Please report at 9 a.m. Do not return to the lecture halls until further notice." Campus security didn't see a mind, they saw a trespasser with melanin. The envelope in Elijah's hands felt heavier than it should. A single sheet of paper sealed behind institutional politeness. But it might as well have been a verdict. The words on the front were sterile. From the Office of Human Resources, immediate review required. He didn't open it right away. He knew what it said. At 8:59 a.m., Elijah sat in the outer lobby of Harvard's HR office, the only person of color in the room. A receptionist glanced at him, then quickly looked away. His uniform, clean, pressed, loyal, suddenly felt like a costume. Not protection, not identity, just a reminder of where they believed he belonged. The double doors opened. Elijah Reed? A woman in a beige suit called his name, as if she wasn't sure it belonged to a real person. He stood. The office inside was cold. A long conference table. A tray of untouched croissants. A pitcher of water. At the far end sat two administrators, one from HR, one from campus security. And to Elijah's surprise, Dr. Nathaniel Carr. The air tightened. Carr didn't look at him. The HR rep began. "Mr. Reed, thank you for coming. This meeting is regarding an incident involving unauthorized access to academic research spaces, after hours, and the use of university equipment outside of your designated role." Elijah's expression remained calm. "I was cleaning, like I've done for years." The security officer interjected. "Our internal review indicates that you entered restricted classrooms and made use of the chalkboard during non-operational hours, on more than one occasion." Elijah turned slightly. There were no signs posted, no locks. Carr spoke now, his voice like glass. Lecture room 3A was not meant for custodial staff to engage with instructional materials. Elijah faced him. "Is there a policy against writing?" "There's a policy against trespassing," the officer said. There it was. The unspoken accusation, now spoken. Trespassing. As if Elijah hadn't walked those halls for years. As if the badge on his hip didn't open those doors nightly. As if intellect without enrollment was theft. The HR rep adjusted her glasses. "To clarify, Mr. Reed, were you enrolled in any academic program during the time you used the board?" Elijah shook his head. "No." A pause. "Then under university policy, your use of research materials." "I didn't steal research," Elijah interrupted, voice low but firm. "I solved an equation on a board, that's all." Carr leaned forward now. "And yet you distributed that solution online, without citation, without context. That video has misrepresented the nature of our department's work." "I didn't distribute it," Elijah said. "And you know that." Carr's eyes narrowed, but he didn't respond. Because he did know. And still, the table stared at Elijah like he was guilty. Of something. Of everything. Because in their minds he had done more than write on a board. He had overstepped. And worse, he had done it while black. If Elijah had been a white man, gifted and eccentric, they'd be debating whether to offer him an honorary degree. But instead they sat here searching for policies to contain him. Because Harvard could not admit the truth. That a black janitor had embarrassed a tenured white professor in his own domain. The HR rep continued. "Carefully now. We are placing you on immediate administrative leave pending a full review. Your building access will be suspended, and we ask that you not return to any academic spaces until further notice." "And my job?" "Undetermined." Elijah stood slowly. "I've cleaned classrooms here longer than any of you have been on this campus. You all walked past me for 8 years. You never asked my name. Never asked what I knew." Carr looked up sharp. "And you never asked for permission." Elijah paused at the door. "I didn't need your permission to learn," he said. "And I sure don't need it to be right." He left the room without looking back. Outside, the student body was buzzing. Dozens had now seen the leaked email. Carr's early attempt to target Elijah. Screenshots were circulating. Hashtags grew sharper. Elijah Reed. Black genius ignored. Harvard erased. Some students began organizing. Group chats filled with anger. A protest was being planned. But in the administration building, none of that had yet reached the top. All they saw was a security risk. Later that afternoon, as Elijah gathered his belongings from the supply closet, a junior named Olivia, pre-law student of color, quiet but observant, stood in the hallway watching him. She hesitated before speaking. "They suspended you, didn't they?" He nodded. She stepped closer. "You know, if you had been a student, and they caught you doing what you did, they would have expelled you." He gave a tired smile. "Yeah, but here's the twist," she added. "You're not enrolled, so they can't expel you." He met her eyes. Something in her tone was different. Rebellious. "They're gonna try to erase this," she said, "but we're not going to let them." She walked away without waiting for permission or thanks. Elijah stood there, motionless, because in a place that denied him a seat at the table, someone had finally offered him a microphone. That evening, as the administration drafted a press statement, calling the incident a misunderstanding involving facility protocols, Olivia published a post on the official Harvard subreddit, tagged with 3 words that would shift the entire narrative. "We want Elijah." The post went viral in under an hour. The chalkboard was erased, but not the fire it sparked online. By morning, room 3A had been wiped clean. The board that once held Elijah Reed's solution, the one that shook the internet, rewrote egos and cracked open centuries-old academic walls, was erased before the first lecture of the day. No trace. Not even a smudge. But the internet never forgets. The phrase "we want Elijah" trended within 12 hours of Olivia's post. What began on Reddit was picked up by black student unions at MIT, Yale, and Howard. By lunchtime there were group photos of students holding signs with equations, real ones. Followed, "If he solved this, why was he suspended?" Elijah wasn't online to see it. He didn't own a smartphone. His laptop, an old second-hand Dell, hadn't connected to campus Wi-Fi since they revoked his credentials. He was sitting in his apartment, 2 bus lines and a 10-minute walk away from the gates of Harvard Yard, surrounded by papers, printouts, and a spiral notebook that still smelled faintly of bleach. But the damage Harvard had done was louder than he'd ever be. That afternoon, in a televised press conference, the university spokesperson stepped up to a podium lined with microphones. "We are aware of the recent video circulating regarding an incident inside one of our classrooms. Harvard University values intellectual curiosity from all members of its community. However," she paused. There it was. The professional pivot from praise to protocol. "However, all individuals must operate within the bounds of their assigned duty. Unauthorized use of restricted spaces violates our institutional policies and compromises academic integrity." They never said Elijah's name. Not once. They spoke of a member of staff, an individual, a facilities worker. But the nation knew who they meant, and the nation had already made up its mind. Meanwhile, in the administrative building, Dr. Carr watched the live stream with his arms folded. His office door was closed, but the whispers beyond it were loud. "Kara's name isn't even in the statement. Isn't it his research that got corrected? They're protecting him. Harvard doesn't want to admit a janitor did more in 5 minutes than a department did in 5 months." Kara could feel it. His reputation, once ironclad, now brittle at the edges. But he wasn't worried about public opinion. He was worried about perception. And perception, in academia, is a currency. If the narrative continued, he'd lose not only face, but funding. His grant renewal for the Neural Calculus Initiative was already under internal review. The committee had questions. The donors had concerns. And though no one said it outright, Carr knew what was coming. How could you not notice someone solving your problem under your nose? How can we trust your research if a janitor outperformed you on tape? He opened the folder marked Elijah Reed. It was thin. Too thin. Facilities records. No criminal history. No disciplinary flags. Just invisibility. Carr muttered under his breath. He wasn't supposed to matter. But now, Elijah was becoming a symbol. And symbols have power. At the edge of Cambridge, Elijah sat alone with his calculator. Not because he had an assignment. Not because he was being graded. But because he needed to. Because when the world denied you space, you made equations your refuge. You built logic in the place of fairness. You found comfort in the one place they couldn't take away. Your mind. He scribbled a system of partial differentials on a blank page. then flipped it and began again. This time in pen. A knock came at the door. He opened it slowly. It was Olivia. Behind her stood Drew, and two more students he didn't recognize. One was holding a manila envelope. "We raised some money," Olivia said, voice steady. "And we started a petition." Elijah blinked. "For what?" She held out the envelope. "For you to be reinstated. But not as janitor." He stared at her, confused. "You should be in the classroom," she said, "not cleaning it." Drew stepped forward. "We submitted your name to the Open Math Fellowship Board. It's a private organization, non-traditional mathematicians. They fund people like you, independent scholars. There's a chance." Elijah didn't reach for the envelope. He didn't smile. Instead, he sat back down, motioning for them to come inside. "Let me tell you something," he said. "There's a difference between going viral and being valued. One fades in days. The other, I never." The room grew still. "Don't mistake applause for acceptance," he added. "They'll cheer for the performance, but they'll still lock the stage when the curtain falls." Olivia nodded slowly. "Then let's build a new stage." He looked at her. Really looked. And for the first time in days, something softened in his eyes. Hours later, Harvard's official faculty page was quietly updated. Dr. Carr's bio now read, "Special Consultant, Neural Optimization, Pending Committee Review." His title was still intact, but barely. And in a private Slack channel between students and faculty, someone leaked a memo. "Elijah Reed's internal hearing will be held Monday at 10:30 a.m. It is not open to the public. No cameras permitted." The comment thread below it erupted. "Why not? Transparency? They're scared of what we'll see." And then, one line that changed everything. "If they won't bring the truth into the room, we'll bring the room to the truth." A group of law students rented out the quad space behind the HR building. They planned to live stream a public truth hearing. Same time, same day, one witness, Elijah Reed. They titled it, "The Equation They Tried to Erase." Unexpected twist. That night, a faculty member anonymously sent Elijah a private message through Drew. It included two attachments. The first, a copy of Dr. Carr's unpublished research notes, proof that Carr had taken Elijah's chalkboard solution and restructured it into his proposal for a revised grant submission. The second, a letter Carr drafted to the grant committee, dated after Elijah's suspension, with no mention of Elijah at all. In fact, Carr had written, "After an intense period of internal recalibration, my model has reached breakthrough clarity." Elijah stared at the files. He'd seen theft before. He'd been dismissed before. But this?
This was academic robbery.
White-collar erasure, packaged in footnotes and fake humility. He closed the folder slowly, heart quiet, anger surgical. They hadn't just erased his board. They were trying to erase his existence from the work he'd rewritten, and now he had proof. As the Monday hearing approached, Carr prepared his statement behind closed doors. But before the HR meeting could begin, the dean's assistant interrupted him with a whisper. "Sir, someone's just sent the full email thread to the Harvard Tribune. And your research file." Carr's face drained of color. Because now the whole world wouldn't just see Elijah's solution. They'd see Carr trying to steal it. Hashtags trended, but Harvard stayed silent. Who decides who belongs? The moment the email thread and research files leaked, Harvard's facade of silence fractured. At first it was a few anonymous Twitter accounts piecing the puzzle together. Screenshots, timestamps, side-by-side comparisons of Elijah's chalkboard work and Carr's grant draft. But by morning, it was everywhere. Stolen brilliance. Cite Elijah. Black intellect matters. On TikTok, educators stitched together explainer videos, highlighting Elijah's corrections. One professor at MIT made a 4-minute breakdown comparing Carr's earlier published models to the leaked ones. He didn't just improve the math, he transformed it. CNN picked up the story by noon. The headline read, "Harvard professor accused of using janitor's work without credit." By evening, NBC, NPR and The Guardian had reported. Op-eds flooded timelines. The calculus of erasure. Black genius in white institutions. From janitor to mathematician. What Elijah Reed tells us about hidden talent. Intellect doesn't wear a name tag. But while the world debated, Harvard refused to speak. Their only statement came through a brief release. The university is conducting a thorough review of all facts related to the matter, and stands by its commitment to integrity, equity and transparency. No apology. No clarification. No name. They were betting on the fire to die out. But the fire was now a movement. On campus, the quad was no longer quiet. Dozens of students, black, white, international, grad and undergrad, were setting up chairs, sound systems, live stream equipment. The unofficial truth hearing had begun to resemble a civil rights rally, more than a campus event. Olivia stood at the mic first. Behind her hung a banner. "You can't suspend brilliance." Her voice cracked as she began. "My grandfather cleaned factories. My mother cleaned homes. They told me to get into spaces where no one would question my worth. But even here, at Harvard, I've watched our worth be erased." She paused, then pointed to the crowd. "Elijah Reed didn't sneak into your classroom. He survived in it. He didn't cheat the system. He exposed it." The applause rolled like thunder. Next was a physics major from Nigeria, who said he once saw Elijah studying late, but was too afraid to ask why a janitor was working through textbooks alone. "Now I wish I'd sat next to him," he admitted. "Maybe I would have learned faster." Speaker after speaker shared variations of the same truth. They'd walked past Elijah, dismissed him, until now. And now, they couldn't unsee him. Elijah, meanwhile, stood behind the curtain, watching. He'd never spoken to a crowd, never had an audience beyond fluorescent lights and waxed floors. But he knew the moment had chosen him. He walked to the mic slowly, no script, just his notebook, in hand. "I wasn't trying to become a symbol," he began. "I was just trying not to disappear." His voice was quiet, steady. "For 8 years I cleaned classrooms where I wasn't allowed to ask questions. I solved equations no one knew I understood. And when I finally let the chalk speak for me, I was erased." A hush fell. "But here's what no one tells you," he continued. "Being invisible is exhausting. It takes work to shrink yourself, to survive in corners, to never be seen as more than your job, your skin, your silence." He flipped to a page in his notebook. "This is my calculus," he said. "Not just numbers, but the cost of being underestimated. The equation of exclusion. Every variable you ignored, added up." Applause again. But Elijah didn't smile. "I'm not here to beg for a seat at your table," he said, eyes scanning the crowd. "I'm here to build my own, and every student, worker, mind you've overlooked. They're invited." The crowd stood. Someone started chanting, "Say his name. Say his name." And this time the name wasn't tied to trauma. It was tied to truth. Across the street, inside the HR building, the official internal hearing had begun. Kerr sat before a panel of deans and administrators. He looked tired, hollow. The leaked documents had done more than damage his career. They had unveiled his fear. The fear that he had been outsmarted. Not by a peer, but by someone the institution never trained, never welcomed, never expected. He was asked directly, "Did you knowingly incorporate Mr. Reed's work into your proposal without credit?" He hesitated. "I reinterpreted material from internal board work." The dean held up the side-by-side images. "This is handwriting, Dr. Carr. Not code, not software, chalk." Kerr leaned back, silent. The truth had already spoken. That night, Harvard's official page posted a new update. "Effective immediately, Dr. Nathaniel Carr has been placed on indefinite administrative leave pending further review. The university reaffirms its commitment to ethical research and intellectual equity." Still no apology. Still no Elijah. But the absence spoke volumes. Unexpected twist. At midnight, Elijah received a call. A calm voice on the line said, "Elijah Reed?" "Yes." "This is Dr. Simone Vick, with the Claiborne Institute for Independent Mathematics. We saw your work. All of it. And we don't care about your resume. We care about your mind." A pause. "We'd like to offer you a funded research fellowship. Your own lab. Your own team. You design the focus. We'll sponsor it." Elijah didn't respond right away. He simply looked down at his chalk-stained fingers and whispered, "Why me?" Dr. Vick replied, "Because you're what genius looks like when it's not given a ladder, but builds one anyway." The next morning, Elijah received an unexpected package at his door. Inside was a black box, velvet-lined. He opened it slowly. It was a plaque.
Elijah C. Reed, guest lecturer, Department of Mathematics, Harvard University.
No, just a date, just a time, just an invitation. His file was deeper than anyone guessed. If only someone had ever looked. The plaque lay on Elijah's kitchen table like an impossible mirage. His name, Elijah C. Reed engraved in silver against black marble. Beneath it the words glowed under the kitchen light. Guest lecturer, Department of Mathematics. He hadn't asked for it. He hadn't applied, but something had changed. For the first time in weeks, Elijah allowed himself to breathe. He traced the letters with his thumb. It didn't feel like victory. Not yet. It felt like exposure. Harvard wasn't trying to make amends. They were trying to save face. He knew the institution. It didn't apologize. It recalculated. And yet, beneath the politics, something more personal stirred. A small flickering validation that the years of erasure hadn't been a hallucination. That what he'd carried in silence had been real.
Across the river, in the administration wing, Dr. Geraldine Marks, Dean of Academic Affairs, sat in her office long after the building had emptied. The Elijah Reed scandal had fractured every clean line of Harvard's image. Students demanded reform, media outlets demanded comment, and donors demanded distance.
She opened her laptop and searched the internal archive. Elijah's personnel file was basic. Employment records, payroll data, standard background checks. But something caught her eye. A line at the bottom. Verification discrepancy. 2015 intake. Pending external confirmation. It had been flagged and ignored. Curiosity piqued. She clicked the archived tag. Within minutes, a hidden folder unfolded. The contents were sparse but damning. Attached was a PDF labeled Academic Verification. Elijah C. Reed, Georgia Institute of Technology. She opened it and froze. The transcript showed near-perfect grades. GPA 3.94, major in applied mathematics, full scholarship recipient. But at the bottom was a handwritten note from a Georgia Tech administrator, dated over a decade ago. Student placed on indefinite withdrawal following unresolved disciplinary review. Laptop theft investigation. Marks frowned. She scrolled further. There was no proof, no follow-up documentation, just the accusation. And beneath it a line stamped in red. Case dismissed. Insufficient evidence. But there was one more file, one that hadn't been uploaded to Harvard's system. An email chain from a Georgia Tech staffer, addressed to the Harvard hiring office from years earlier. Mr. Reed's file appears incomplete. There is indication he may have previously enrolled under academic scholarship. Recommend verification. No one had verified. No one had followed up. He had applied as Elijah C. Reed for a janitorial position. And Harvard, too self-assured to imagine intellect beneath a maintenance uniform, had never looked twice. He hadn't hidden his education. They had buried it for him. By morning, the discovery rippled through the upper offices, like a quiet detonation. Only a handful of administrators saw the memo before it was classified. But whispers spread quickly through the ranks. He was educated. He had a degree. To some, it made his brilliance less mysterious, less magical. To others, it made the institution's negligence unforgivable. Carr heard about it before noon. He was in his office packing the last of his things. His nameplate already removed from the door. The air was still, heavy with humiliation, and the faint scent of arrogance gone stale. When he read the memo headline, Internal Record Confirmation, Elijah Reed, former academic scholar, his stomach twisted. It wasn't disbelief. It was something darker. He had spent decades proving that intelligence was measurable, quantifiable, rankable. But now the hierarchy had collapsed. The man he'd looked down on wasn't just intelligent. He'd been qualified all along. And the worst part, Harvard's system hadn't even cared enough to notice. Meanwhile, in the quad, Elijah walked across the lawn for the first time without a mop or a broom in hand. Students turned to look. Some smiled. Some whispered. A few applauded softly, the sound awkward but sincere. He kept his head low. He wasn't there to make a statement. He was there to teach his first guest lecture. Inside the lecture hall, he paused before the same whiteboard where it all began. Someone had written a single message across the top before he arrived. Welcome home, Mr. Reed. For a moment his throat tightened. He erased it quietly. Home was complicated. He turned to face the room. The seats were full. Students, reporters, even faculty. The same people who once stepped around him, now leaned forward to listen. He picked up the chalk. Mathematics, he began, isn't about formulas. It's about patterns, seeing what others ignore. Sometimes those patterns show up in numbers. Sometimes they show up in people. The class was silent. Every equation, he continued, is a conversation between what's known and what's possible. I guess I'm living proof that those two things can exist in the same person. The chalk scraped softly against the board. His handwriting was steady, confident. In the back row, Olivia watched, eyes bright with pride. And just outside the door, unseen, Dean Marks stood listening. She had brought with her a sealed envelope, one she hadn't decided whether to deliver. Inside it was the truth about Elijah's past. The proof that he had once been one step from academic greatness before racism and bureaucracy tripped him. She watched him draw an elegant curve on the board. She thought of the buried file, and she realized Harvard had been so obsessed with preserving its own legend that it had nearly destroyed one in real time. After the lecture, as the room emptied, Dean Marks approached. "Elijah," she said. He turned, startled. "I owe you more than an apology." She held up the envelope. "We found something in your old employment record. Something that should have been seen years ago." He looked at it but didn't take it. "What's in it?" "Proof," she said softly. "That you were never supposed to be a janitor here." He paused. "You think I need proof?" Marks hesitated. "I think the world does." He took the envelope but didn't open it. "Then let them find it on their own. I'm done explaining my worth." He walked away, leaving her standing there. Behind him, the chalkboard still glowed faintly with numbers. The universal language he had always spoken fluently, even when no one was listening. Unexpected twist. Later that night, as Elijah returned home, he found a letter taped to his door. No name, just a return address from Georgia Tech. Inside was a short note, handwritten on official letterhead. "Mr. Reed, we deeply regret the administrative failure that led to your withdrawal into it. The record has been corrected. Your academic status is reinstated retroactively. A copy of your diploma is enclosed." He unfolded the parchment paper. Bachelor of Science in Applied Mathematics. Cum laude. Georgia Institute of Technology. He sat down, silent. The paper trembled in his hands. For years his intellect had been invisible. Now the world was catching up to what he had always known. The next morning, a courier delivered a new envelope to Harvard's administration building. Inside was a formal request addressed to the dean.
Effective immediately, I decline the honorary teaching position offered.
"My integrity cannot be leveraged as an apology. I'm building something new." Signed, Elijah C. Reed. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, he'd added one line. "Genius doesn't need permission to exist." Black and brown voices demanded answers, but the administration closed its doors. It began with one banner, strung between two trees near Widener Library, handwritten in red marker on a white bedsheet. "You can't silence what you refuse to hear." By noon, there were 5 more. "Genius is not a uniform." Elijah Reed deserved better. "Our minds aren't conditional." "Not your janitor. Not your shame." "We built this yard too." Word of Elijah's declined teaching position had spread fast. Not through press releases. Harvard hadn't addressed it publicly, but through screenshots, reposts, and a single photo that went viral in under an hour. Elijah holding the letter of withdrawal, standing in front of the same whiteboard he once cleaned. The caption read, "They invited him to teach. He chose to leave. They don't deserve him." And Harvard Yard erupted. That Monday, black and brown student groups across campus announced a walkout. Classes paused. Cafeterias emptied. Group chats blew up. At 11:30 a.m., the bell at Memorial Church rang, not for a sermon, but for a reckoning. Hundreds gathered in the yard. Law students brought copies of Elijah's reinstated transcript and distributed them like leaflets. Engineering students wrote mathematical formulas from his notebook on poster boards. Literature majors held up books with bookmarks reading, "Cite Black Brilliance." At the front stood Olivia, megaphone in hand. "We've read your silence," she said, "and now you'll read our protest." Behind her, Drew stood holding a sign that read, "He solved the problem. Harvard became the problem." The crowd roared. Faculty watched from windows, some nodding quietly, some avoiding eye contact altogether. Inside the administration building, the blinds were drawn. Harvard had chosen to disappear behind polished glass. Elijah wasn't there. He watched the live stream from his apartment, shoulders tense, unsure what to feel. Gratitude? Anger? Grief? He hadn't asked for any of this. Not the attention, not the protests, not the applause. But what struck him most wasn't the size of the crowd. It was the signs, the language. They weren't just demanding justice for him. They were demanding space for themselves. Inside the administrative boardroom, a crisis meeting was in session. The provost spoke first. This can't become another national firestorm. We need to address it head on. But how? One trustee asked. We offered the man a teaching post. He declined. Dean Marks, who had remained mostly silent, finally spoke. Because it wasn't a gesture, it was damage control, and he saw right through it. What do you recommend? We listen. For one. There was a long pause.
Then, and admit we failed?
Yes, she said. Because we did. But not everyone agreed. One board member leaned forward. We're not apologizing for discovering brilliance. Dean Marks didn't blink. You didn't discover anything. You ignored it until the world forced your eyes open. The room fell silent again. Because she was right. Outside, students began a sit-in. They sat cross-legged on the cobblestone, books in their laps, chalk in their hands. They wrote equations, poems, quotes. From Baldwin. From bell hooks. From W.E.B. Du Bois. At the center, one student wrote, "To be black and brilliant is to be disbelieved." Another followed, "We are not anomalies. We are inevitable." A reporter from the New York Times captured the scene. The next day, the photo would run front page, with the headline, "Harvard faces legacy of erasure after janitor turned genius rejects offer." But in real time, the students weren't thinking about headlines. They were thinking about the message, about the centuries of erasure that had led to this moment, about how many Elijahs had walked these halls unseen, and how many more would, if the system didn't change. By nightfall, campus security was instructed to begin clearing the yard. Gently. At first. Polite warnings. Institutional smiles. But students refused. "We'll leave," Olivia said when you say his name. The officer hesitated. "Miss, please. You said it when you suspended him." She shot back. "Say it now." No response. And that silence, that calculated, cowardly silence, was all the crowd needed. They stayed. Unexpected twist. At 2:17 a.m., the same hour Elijah once solved Carr's equation in the dark, someone projected a giant image onto the side of Sever Hall. It was the original surveillance still. Elijah with chalk in hand. Underneath, in massive white letters, Harvard didn't build him. They just buried him. The crowd, still camped out in sleeping bags and blankets, erupted in cheers. Phones shot upward. The moment went viral before sunrise. And by morning, something shifted. For the first time, Harvard's president issued a personal statement. It was simple. Stark. Elijah C. Reid's contributions to this university, intellectual and otherwise, are undeniable. We recognize that the institution failed to see him fully. We are reviewing all relevant policies with urgency. More importantly, we are listening. They still hadn't said sorry, but they said his name. Back in his apartment, Elijah sat at his small desk, watching footage of the projection on his building. He didn't smile, but something in his shoulders softened. The stiffness born from decades of being unseen, released, if only for a moment. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Olivia. "They stayed all night. For you. For all of us." He typed and erased 5 responses. Then finally said, "I never wanted to protest. I just wanted to be allowed to think." Her reply came seconds later.
That's why we're protesting. Later that day, Elijah received an anonymous email from someone at Stanford University. The subject line read,
"Visiting scholar offer. Full term. Independent research lab. Fall enrollment." The message ended with one line. "We don't need you to prove anything. We just want you to build." He stared at the screen, and for the first time in years, considered saying yes. They tested him to disprove him, and failed their own test of humanity. The offer from Stanford sat in Elijah's inbox like a second sunrise. Warm, distant, unreal. A full-term visiting scholar post. Independent lab. Creative freedom. A seat, not as token, but as architect. He hadn't responded. Not because he didn't want it, but because something unresolved still hung in the air. Unfinished, like a proof with a missing step. Harvard had said his name, but they hadn't acknowledged their sin. And worse, some still weren't ready to. The invitation came 2 days after the student protest ended. Formal. Scripted. A letter from the Department of Mathematics, requesting Elijah's participation in what they called a collegial review, an internal panel of tenured faculty who wanted, as the letter put it, to assess the mathematical depth and originality of Mr. Reid's solutions. Translation. They didn't believe him, or more accurately, they needed proof he belonged. Not to validate his work, but to validate their discomfort. It was academic white glove racism. Polite, framed as policy, laced with control. Elijah read the letter twice, then again, and smiled bitterly. They weren't done trying to own him. The meeting took place in the Maxwell Auditorium, usually reserved for faculty seminars. 4 professors from the department sat on a panel, 2 white men, 1 South Asian woman, and a black professor named Dr. Harris, who'd been at Harvard for 20 years but remained perpetually outside the inner circle. The audience was invite-only, but word leaked. Dozens of students watched through the small glass windows in the back, phones out, ready. Elijah arrived in silence, notebook in hand, dressed plainly, no tie, no suit, just his presence. The head of the panel, Dr. Michael Renton, began. "Mr. Reed," he said, "thank you for joining us. This is not a disciplinary review. We are here to evaluate the structural rigor of your recent mathematical contributions as presented both in public and private documentation." Elijah nodded. Renton continued, "We will present a series of high-level problems, some derivative of current research, others from published journals, and request that you solve them in real time, on the board for peer analysis." Elijah said nothing. He walked to the board. The first problem appeared on the screen overhead, a dense equation from a neural topography study involving tensor fields. He read it once, picked up the chalk, solved it in under 5 minutes. No wasted motion, no guesses, just deliberate thought and perfect rhythm. Renton's face didn't change. The second problem, nonlinear differential mapping, took him 8 minutes. Solved. The third, a contrived convoluted expression clearly designed to confuse, took longer. Elijah paused midway through, then turned. "This was published in 1996, he said. "It was later retracted. The errors in the 6th assumption. Your constants can't converge within that boundary." Dr. Harris leaned forward slightly. Renton blinked. Elijah rewrote the problem correctly this time, and solved it in 12 lines. The room went still. After 45 minutes, he stepped away from the board. No theatrics, no speech, just chalk dust on his palms, and a steady heartbeat. Dr. Nadia Kelly, the only one on the panel who looked impressed, finally spoke. "Where did you learn to think like this?" Elijah looked at her. "Alone," Dr. Harris added. "He doesn't just solve, he interprets." Renton, visibly frustrated, tried to regain control. "Mathematics," he said, "is more than solving isolated equations. It's about integration with the field, collaboration, fear validation. You haven't published, you haven't presented, you haven't engaged." Elijah's reply was quiet, but landed like thunder. Neither did Newton. Until they let him. Renton flushed. Elijah continued. "You think visibility is credibility, but sometimes, the most rigorous minds are the ones you never let in." The room was silent, and in that silence lived decades of exclusion. Rosters without diversity, journals guarded by gatekeepers, and offices where only certain voices were trusted with chalk. Later that day, the panel released a brief statement. Elijah Reed demonstrated advanced proficiency in high-level mathematical problem-solving. The department will continue internal discussions regarding future collaboration and pathways. It was lukewarm, intentionally non-committal. But the world didn't wait. The student newspaper ran the headline, "He solved every problem. They still couldn't name the real one." And beneath it, a quote from a student overheard in the hallway. "They tested him to prove he wasn't real. He passed. They didn't." That evening, Elijah received another email, this time from a small liberal arts university in North Carolina. A black woman on their math faculty had seen the stream. She wrote, "We don't need to test you. We need to teach what you are. Come help us build a pipeline for the next Elijahs. We want your mind, your voice, and your vision." Attached her proposal to co-create a math ethics program centered on race equity and access. It wasn't a title. It was a legacy. Elijah closed the laptop and sat in silence. Harvard's math department had demanded proof. But the real problem was never his equations. It was their inability to imagine a black janitor as their equal, until the math did it for them. And even now, with chalkboard after chalkboard conquered, they still couldn't solve for their own bias. But Elijah? He had already moved past the test. Now he was rewriting the curriculum. The next morning, Harvard's faculty senate met to discuss the Reed effect, the internal term being used to describe the growing pressure to reform tenure admissions and representation. Elijah's name was mentioned 17 times in the first hour, but not once by Elijah himself. He was already on a train. headed south. Destination the future. He was given 5 minutes on stage. What he said rewrote every assumption. They called it a spotlight segment, a harmless feel-good inclusion to close out the International Conference on Mathematical Innovation, hosted that year in Boston. Scholars, academics, and keynote guests filled the ornate lecture hall. The organizers had offered Elijah 5 minutes, not 10,
Not a session.
just 5. Enough time to smile, say something humble, and walk off, an accessory to their narrative of inclusion. Elijah accepted, but he had no intention of playing their part. The air in the ballroom buzzed with anticipation, though most of the crowd didn't know who he was. He wasn't in the official program, just a name on a slide. Elijah C. Reid, independent thinker. Backstage, a technician clipped the microphone to his shirt. Nervous? The man asked. Elijah smiled faintly. No, it wasn't confidence. It was clarity. For years he had been talked over, erased, ignored. This stage wasn't about recognition. It was about revelation. 5 minutes could be a lifetime, if you said something no one expected. The host walked to the mic. Our final guest today is someone whose story you may have seen online, an unexpected voice in the mathematical world, and one whose recent journey has reminded us all that brilliance often hides in plain sight. Polite applause followed. Elijah stepped out to the center of the stage. Simple, calm. The crowd's claps faded quickly. They were curious, not convinced. He looked out over the sea of suits, glasses, lanyards. He began. My name is Elijah Reid. I've never published in a journal. I've never defended a dissertation. I've never held a title in your departments. But for the past 8 years, I've solved equations in the dark, quietly after cleaning your lecture halls. No movement in the crowd. I wasn't given chalk. I found it. I wasn't handed proof. I built it. A few murmurs now. I know what some of you are thinking. That this is a novelty. That I'm a lucky exception. A rare spark from an unexpected place. He leaned slightly forward. That's a lie. The murmurs stopped. I'm not rare. I'm just visible. And you're uncomfortable because I didn't come through the front door you built. I climbed through the back window, barefoot. Gasps. A sharp silence. I've had my intelligence dismissed with a glance. My credentials questioned while others coasted on assumption. I've seen theories met with applause, only when said in a different voice. He paused. My skin color made me invisible. Until my math made you look again. A single clap. Then 2. Then silence again. But this isn't just about me. It's about how many minds you've missed. How many discoveries you've delayed. How much genius you've buried under formality and fear. He looked directly at the front row, where the same institutions that had once ignored him now sat scribbling notes. I've been tested, examined, prodded, debated, and still some of you can't admit what you already know. He raised his voice slightly now. That I don't need your permission to be extraordinary. And then, softer. None of us do. He paused one final time. In your world, intellect is gated, but knowledge doesn't ask for a key. It just asks to be seen. Thank you. He stepped back. The room was silent. Then, standing applause. Not polite. Not obligatory. Reverent. Within 30 minutes the speech was online. First, as a Twitter clip. Then a TikTok soundbite. Then the full recording on YouTube. The title. Janitor's speech silences Harvard elite. Elijah Reid breaks the system in 5 minutes. The views climbed by the second. By midnight, 7.3 million. By morning, 18 million. Comments flooded in. His voice belongs in every classroom. Why does this feel more important than any lecture I ever paid for? He didn't break the system. He exposed it. We need to stop asking if black brilliance exists. We need to ask why we keep missing it. Elijah's inbox filled with offers, speaking engagements, interviews, university invites. But one message stood out, from a girl named Amara, 15, a sophomore at a public school in Mississippi. She wrote, Mr. Reid, they put me in remedial math because I get nervous talking in class. I saw your video. I stayed up all night learning derivatives. I didn't think people like me were allowed to be good at this. Thank you for proving we can. Elijah stared at the message for a long time. Then replied, you were always allowed. They just didn't teach you that. Back at Harvard, the faculty senate watched the speech in silence. Dr. Carr, still technically on administrative leave, stood in the back of the room, arms folded. One professor whispered, He said more in 5 minutes than some of us have in 5 years. No one disagreed. Dean Marks closed her laptop gently. She turned to the room. Now what are we going to do about it? That night, at a gala honoring academic achievement in Boston, the keynote speaker, a Nobel laureate, quoted Elijah's lecture without attribution. Elijah saw the clip online. He recognized his words immediately. Again, erased. Even now, with millions watching, the system still wanted to separate the message from the messenger. He didn't get angry,
He got focused.
because he realized something crucial. Visibility isn't the same as power. And if he wanted real change, he'd have to stop being their story and start writing his own. The next day, Elijah made an announcement from his newly launched website. I am founding the Reed Institute, a space for mathematical brilliance outside of institutional borders. Our mission to fund, elevate, and publish underrepresented minds in math and theory. No gatekeeping, no degrees required. At the bottom, a single line read, "You didn't see us coming, but we're here now." Ivy League departments across the country fought over him. But what did he want? Before the viral lecture, Elijah Reed couldn't get a call back.
Not for a teaching assistantship.
Not for a mentorship program. Not even for a continuing education class. He was a name in lowercase, a resume ignored. The math world didn't just miss him. They refused to imagine he could exist. And now? Now his inbox was a flood. Columbia wanted him for a visiting professorship. Yale offered a 1-year fellowship with full academic freedom. MIT proposed co-authoring a paper based on his chalkboard work, with full credit. Stanford upped their original offer, his own lab, unrestricted funding, first pick of graduate researchers. The irony was surgical. The same gatekeepers who once walked past him now competed to bring him in like a prize, like proof that they could evolve. But Elijah wasn't interested in being anyone's trophy. He wasn't looking to be claimed. 1 week after his viral lecture, Elijah sat in a sleek glass conference room at Columbia University. 2 deans, a program director, and a diversity strategist sat across from him, smiling as if they'd known him forever. We're excited, one said. You're a phenomenon. A once-in-a-generation thinker. Elijah listened. He let them talk. You'd have full curriculum freedom, the other added. We'd build an entire course around your perspective. Then the strategist spoke. And of course your presence sends a powerful message to future applicants. You'd be inspiring, a new kind of pipeline. Elijah raised an eyebrow. A pipeline to where? They blinked. He continued, calmly. I've already inspired people, without a title, without your building. Now you want me to help fix the system that left me cleaning floors. Awkward laughter. One of them cleared their throat. We'd be honored if you'd consider. I'm not here to be your reform. They fell silent. Because if you really wanted change, Elijah said, you'd have found me before the applause. He stood. Now you want my name on your brochures, he added. But I'm building something that doesn't need your brochure at all. He left them at the table, surprised, stunned, silenced. The offers kept coming. UC Berkeley, Princeton, even Oxford reached out. The math world had turned desperate, hungry to affiliate with the man who had rewritten their perception of genius. But Elijah wasn't seduced. He'd seen how fast admiration turns performative. For every offer, he asked the same question. Would you have hired me if I was still a janitor? None could answer honestly. In a quiet cafe in